Welcome back, everybody. I have a distinct pleasure today to interview somebody who's always doing the interviewing. So it's going to be fun for us to play reverse roles, so to speak. I've got with me Grant Williams. Most of the world in social media know exactly who Grant is. He's the founder and publisher of Things That Make Me Go Hmmm, which is probably the most fun name in finance, and the Grant Williams podcast. In 2014, he also co-founded Real Vision. He has only had 35 years of experience in finance, so that would explain the color of his hair. He is a senior advisor at Matterhorn Asset Management in Switzerland, and he's also a portfolio and strategy advisor at Vulpes Investment Management in Singapore. Wow, lots of things. And he'll explain to us why he lives everywhere. But first, I want to ask, who's Grant Williams? Who made you who you are? Where did you grow up? What were the formative moments in your life? Who are your inspirations, mentors? Who are you?
Oh, Danielle, if I had any idea, I'd tell you, but I have no idea. I mean, it's been a long, circuitous journey, and I wish I could say there was some kind of plan to the whole thing, but I'd be lying. The only thing that was kind of planned was that I wanted to be in finance, and I've told this story before, but the only reason I wanted to do that was because my Uncle Harry, who was my dad's friend, was just the coolest parent that I knew, the coolest adult that I knew. Whenever he'd come out for dinner, I was 8 years old and 9 years old, and he was the guy who would teach me card tricks and teach me, jokes and all kinds of fun stuff. So I wanted to be him, and I found out that he was a foreign exchange dealer. He had this cool house and this cool car, and he had like pinball machines. I thought, I want to be that guy. Wouldn't it be great to be Uncle Harry when I grow up? So
where did you grow up?
The UK. This is in the UK. So I grew up just outside London.
Okay.
I was born in 1967, so I kind of grew up in the 70s really, and 70s and 80s. And it's funny, the times we're going into now. I have a very rough recollection of the 70s in the UK. But a very vivid one, in certain places towards the end of the 70s when I was, 10, 11, 12 years old. I remember all the kind of race riots we had in London in the early 80s. I remember all the IRA bombing campaigns that we had in central London through that time. So, it was a time of great social upheaval. And of course, no coincidence, I don't think, I'm sure we'll come on to this, a time of strong and rising inflation. So it was an interesting time to grow up. I lived in a suburb just outside London, far enough outside to not really be caught up in the kind of the real social unrest. But it was, if I wanted to get a bus to the social unrest for any reason, it was 15 minutes away. So I remember those times fondly as a kid. I had a bicycle and a football, and I had no phone, and I had 4 TV channels to watch, 3 in fact, until I was in my teens. And so I had a very happy childhood. I was a sports man. I played every kind of sport I could play, but ended up focusing on football, rugby, and basketball, and was just a happy kid. But all around me was this kind of country that, when I look back on it now, and I've grown to read the history as I've got older. We obviously had the IMF come in 1976 in the middle of my childhood. The UK was basically bailed out by the IMF. I remember the blackouts. I remember the kind of rolling power outs we had. I remember the 3-day week. All that stuff is a vague memory. And it's really only when you get older and you read about this stuff with the perspective of an adult, you understand not just what actually happened, but why it all fit together. And I'm sure there's going to be people watching this now that or not watching this now, but who are young now, that will remember the kind of stuff that we're seeing, particularly in the US, and probably won't understand it for another 15, 20 years until they're old enough to read about it through an adult's eyes and understand the moving parts. But it certainly reminds me very much of those times, very much. There's so many parallels, and I'm sure we'll get into those.
So I guess you grew up then listening to the Rolling Stones, presumably.
Well, do you know what? I love music. I bought a record player, saved up my money, bought. You know those old record players that you had that came in a box? You would carry the box around with you, and you had the speaker in the front, and you'd open it up and you'd stack all the records up. Yep. Yeah, so I saved up my money for Christmas and birthdays, and I bought one of those, and then I started buying records, and I loved music. And my dad would be the first to tell you that his taste in music was pretty abject. I mean, there was a lot of bread, there was a lot of Jack Jones. There wasn't an awful lot of Rolling Stones, but a buddy of mine's brother lent me the Beatles Blue and the Beatles Red albums, and that really was when my eyes just opened to music, and those were really. And I played those things to death. And I was buying Elvis Costello and Squeeze and Sex Pistols and all this kind of stuff that was there. Yeah, it was great. It was fantastic. But it really was the Beatles for me that opened my eyes to just how different and how interesting and emotional music could be. It was I love that record player. I wish I still had it. I would carry it around with me to this day if I could.
If you still had it, you could get a bundle for it on eBay. Absolutely.
Yeah, you're probably right. Vinyl's back, baby. Vinyl's back.
So, curious, do you have any? Who's your football team?
Well, my football team is a team called Fulham, who were in the Premiership for quite some time. So some Americans will have heard of them. And my dad had grown up basically just around the corner from the stadium, and he'd been going there. My dad's been going to watch Fulham for over 70 years now. And so he took me to my first game when I would have been maybe 5 years old. And my dad took me to my first game. I was football mad when I was a kid. And just that experience, my dad and I would go to as many home games as we could. And that was just our time together. We would drive up together in the car, and we'd go and watch the game, and we'd drive home listening to all the scores and the reports and the matches. And it was, I look back on that time really fun. My dad taught me to drive as we were going to football. He would make me drive up to football. So we've had so many memories going to watch Fulham play. None of them were around the football because they sucked for most of my entire life. But
that might be why most Americans have not heard of the team.
No, it's funny because as I said, they genuinely have sucked for most of my life. But we've had a few tastes of moderate success, and it just makes them all the more sweet. When you have a team you don't expect to do anything. I'd hate to be a Man United supporter and you're expected to win every year, and then you're just miserable when you don't. For us, you expect mediocrity at best, and then every now and again they do something exceptional. And it's like, wow, this is what being a fan of a successful football team is all about. Who knew?
Well, I mean, I'm asking you because all of the United States is Ted Lasso crazy. I mean, as a country, we just cannot get enough of this Ted Lasso.
Isn't it great? It's my favorite show. Honest to God, I absolutely love that show. I've watched it. I mean, I'm embarrassed at how many times I've watched each episode, to be honest with you. I love everything about it.
I'm full confessions. First season, I've watched it 3 times. Second season, I've watched it 2 times. So I'm still got to go back and watch the second season for a third time. Every single time you catch a different nuance. I mean, you forget. Right. You forget how important writing is, and
totally
good writing.
Now, have you noticed the episode in the first season when they're at the karaoke bar in Liverpool? And Rebecca gets up and sings "Let It Go" from Frozen, that blew me away when I heard her voice.
Yeah.
But there's one shot when they're singing and the camera's on Keeley, and just over her shoulder is Roy Kent, and he's just in focus, and it's so subtle, but he's mouthing the words to "Let It Go" from Frozen. It's just such a beautifully observed piece of directing, right? Whatever it is. And if you go back and watch it, I guarantee you.
I've got to go back and watch it again. Okay.
It's fantastic.
I'll go back and watch it again.
2 seconds, and it's perfect.
So, so what happened in your post? What we would think of as where did you attend university? And because something along the way made you a nomad.
Yeah. It's look, the first part of the story is easy. I didn't go to university. As I said, growing up in the UK in the 70s and 80s, going to university was the exception, not the norm. I mean, we didn't get that American way of everybody goes to university until really the 90s. We were very late in that. So when I was coming out of school, I wanted to go and study history, and I just about scraped the grades to go and do it, and I was working in my school vacation as a kind of settlements clerk in the Eurobond department at a small Scottish merchant bank in the UK. And when I finished up my holiday job, the guy said to me, "Look, when you've done your exams, if you want a job, we'd love to have you here. There's a job here for you if you want it." And so when I finished my exams, and it was kind of, okay, I want to go to university. What am I going to do? I had this job, I had this job offer here, and there was a partition wall between the desk I'd be sitting at and the desk that was home for the butt of the guy whose job I wanted, who was the Japanese equity warrants dealer. And so it was a case of go to university for 4 years, come out and then try and get that job, or do I go take this job and spend 4 years trying to go next door? And I didn't need a degree on my resume at that point in time to get in. I was in. So I took the job as opposed to going to uni, and I never ever regretted that. In fact, the longer time has gone on, the more grateful I've become that I took that route. I feel like the education I got in the real world in those 4 years, which coincided with the kind of peak of the Japanese equity market,
right?
85 through 89 would have been the years I'd have been at uni. And I'm in the middle of this crazy bull market with a trading book and getting up to my neck in all this stuff and learning on the fly and getting hosed on many, many occasions, and making mistakes and losing money, but overall making extraordinary amounts of money in a market that was just the Wild West. And I wouldn't exchange that for doctorates of any kind. I mean, it was probably the most fun time of my working life. Those first 5 or 6 years were just unbelievably good fun and frantic, and I was young enough to handle it at that point in my life. My hair was a different color then.
Well, I'm laughing because I recently interviewed Art Cassian, and we talked about his father passed away when he was in high school, and so he had no choice. After high school, he had to go. And so he landed at the New York Stock Exchange, and 58 years later, not a moment of regret. And I mean, now he's a walking, talking, living legend. But he took a similar path, and it's just like you, just a walking, talking, living legend, Grant. So,
listen, you can't actually talk about me and Art Cassian in the same breath. You have to put a period, a comma, and parentheses between me and him. I don't deserve to be talked in the same breath.
That was a stretch, but we're all privileged to have known him. So
yes, we are.
So fast forward. Well, first of all, what's missing in the financial media? What's still missing in the financial media today? I'm talking about bubble vision.
Oh boy. Okay. Yeah. Look, we've how much longer we got? I mean, it's interesting. In 2013, I ended up through a really crazy set of coincidences, sitting down for dinner with Raul Pal in Spain, him and Remy Tito, his assistant at research analyst at GMI. And the three of us sat and had dinner, and it was the first time we'd met. And Raul and I corresponded a little bit through mutual friends, but over very specific things that he wanted some help with this and I wanted some help with that. And so we kind of reached out and spoke to each other. It just so happened that I was going to be in Spain for the first time in 20 odd years. So we met for dinner, and we sat down that night with no agenda. We were just going to meet up and have a bite to eat and a bottle of wine and talk. And that night the three of us found ourselves talking about the financial media industry and the kind of the disservice that it had done to the general public and the fact that the narrative coming out of 08, so this was for 2013. So the narrative coming out was that nobody had seen it coming. It was a complete shock. And of course, as well as I do, as well as Raul and Remy knew, that plenty of people saw it coming, but either no one would listen to them, or more importantly, for the purposes of our discussion, no one would give them a platform, because no one who was selling advertising, who was trying to generate advertising revenue, wanted someone coming on saying, get out the markets, there's trouble coming. So, we talked about this that night, and as I said, we hadn't gone there to talk about anything in particular, but I stayed with Raul that night, and we sat up till very late, drinking a bottle of wine and talking about this. And the next morning I had to get up at 5 a.m. and drive from Raul's place, which is in the north end of Spain, to the south coast, because I was in Spain to give a speech. So, I mean, literally we kind of looked at the watch and said, geez, I need to go to bed. I've got to get up in like 2 hours to drive. And so I spent the whole drive down, and Raul went off and did his thing. And it's one of those ideas that you have at 3 o'clock in the morning over a bottle of Rioja, and sounds like a fantastic idea. And then the next morning it's gone. It was a great idea last night. You don't remember it. But this particular idea about how do we create a media platform that is completely unbiased and is just peer-to-peer rather than journalists, and doesn't rely on advertising and isn't beholden to anybody. We can just talk to people. And the idea was just, let's recreate those conversations that we've had in restaurants and bars and offices over the years with peers. You know as well as I do. You go to another country and meet a fellow finance person, and you will sit in a bar and talk about all kinds of things for hours, and it won't be boring. And you have no idea where you're going to go with it, and you have no idea what conclusions we come to. But I guarantee you'll walk away with something in your head thinking, oh, I didn't know that. I need to find out more about that. Or, wow, that's confirmed everything I thought, or that challenges everything. And it's that. So we just wanted to create that. So let's go and find people who have something to say and have some knowledge and experience. And let's just talk to them. Let's just sit down with them and talk, and we'll film it where other people can be a fly on the wall for those conversations. So it was a very simplistic idea, and neither of us had any media training. Neither of us had any journalism training. It was just, well, how difficult would it be? We do it in a pub. Surely we can do it in front of a camera. I mean, it was kind of naive in many ways, I guess. So that's what we started to do, and we did it on a shoestring, and we did it. The four of us. There's the fourth co-founder, Damien Horner, who's just one of the nicest human beings you'll ever meet, and it happens to be a creative and marketing genius. So we had all the parts there, and we just kind of figured it out as we went along, and it was kind of crazy and a lot of fun. And our first shoot in New York, I'll never forget this. We'd actually been offered Barry Silbert's office. Bless him. He said, "Oh, you can have our office and you can use that all day to shoot." So we lined up 6 or 7 interviews that day to be shot at Barry's office, and we showed up there, and his office manager said to us, "This is all great. This is stuff now. Where's your insurance certificate?" And we were like, "Insurance what now?" I mean, we had no idea. So we're frantically trying to, how do we get insured for this? We called the Cayman Islands and tried to get insurance there, but they wouldn't give us insurance that would cover us in New York. We spoke to the office manager. New York wouldn't accept Cayman Islands insurance. So we were screwed. And we had our first interview showing up in like 90 minutes. And so we ran around and we found a hotel room. And so we rented this hotel room for the day. We rock up with cameras and all sorts of stuff. And this room was, it sounds grand, but believe me, it wasn't. It was a suite in that it had a partition wall halfway across that had like a little seating area and then a bedroom. So when you walk in the door, you basically walk, the partition is right in front of you, perpendicular to you. And then either side, you've got the TV and a couch that side and the bed this side. So we took all the furniture out of the bedroom. We just piled it up on this side of the partition wall. Literally, it's just when you walk in, it looked like a warehouse. We piled this stuff up. We had 2 chairs and a table and a lamp. And so people came in to do these interviews. And Ben Hunt was one of the first people who came in that day. And, Ben came in. I was like, just don't look right. Just come in and go, it'll be fine. Trust us, it'll be fine. And so it was complete madness. But I think if we'd spent any more time trying to understand what we ought to do, you choose that word carefully, maybe it wouldn't have happened, because when you get into what you ought to do, you suddenly find impediments everywhere, both in terms of what people tell you it would cost to produce a 30-minute video. We were told it would be 25 grand to produce a 30-minute video. Well, we can't do that. It doesn't work. So instead of giving up, we were too late. We just had to figure it out. So, it was seat of the pants stuff. And, I look back on those early pieces with tremendous pride, but, abject horror at mine and Raoul's and the other guys' interviewing skills. But the business grew, and I think we grew along with it, and it's been fantastic. I mean, it's been a whole new career, I think, for both of us. And we were the 2 in front of the camera, but Remy and Damien, the other 2 founders who were very much in the background, did phenomenal work with the creative and with the technology side of stuff. So
after building this, what's become the Netflix of finance, if you will, what made you decide to leave recently and go off on your own and start your own podcast?
Well, the decisions weren't concurrent. Absolutely not. It was. I did a series of interviews in 2018 called "In Conversation With," where I went to each month I'd go to I'd invite myself into someone's home and ask them if they wouldn't mind giving me the entire day of their lives. I managed to find 12 people generous and gracious enough to say yes. And so I spent that year 2018 traveling around doing those pieces, which I just love. I loved every part of those. I loved the conversations I had. I loved the people I met, the places I went to, the creative process in trying to create something that wasn't just a conversation, but that had an element of art to it, but not for art's sake. It was trying to tell a broader story than the conversation. And so I did that year of those, and I did two pieces during that time called On the Road. One where I went with Steve Diggle to Italy, and we went to 3 cities in Italy, and we talked about what was happening in Italy at the time, banking crisis and politics and history. And again, just fascinating things to learn and discover. And then I had, again, the great good fortune to do another one of those in Washington, D.C. with Neil Howe and Harold Malmgren. And again, just learned so much, and we're able to create just really beautiful pieces that even if you're not a finance geek like you and I, they're just enjoyable, and you'll learn something and you'll learn something. But it wasn't, for me, it was never about the market stuff. I think for the longest time, if you watch my early interviews at Real Vision, you'll see that I was always very much focused on the guest and their experiences rather than what they thought about what was going to happen. And that for me was very deliberate, because when I sat down and rationalized it, I thought, I can talk to you for an hour, but every minute we spend talking about the future is to hopefully educated people guessing about something, right? And it's an educated guess, and it might be based on a lot of experience, but we're guessing. And most of financial content is about the future. Everyone wants to know, what should I buy? What should I sell? What's the Dow going to do? What's the dollar going to do? And of course, the honest answer to that question all the time is I don't know, because none of us do. We don't know.
Yep.
So we're all guessing. But if I talk to you about the past, if I talk to you about your career, about your experiences, the mistakes you've made, the lessons you've learned, you know about that. So you're telling me something that's based in knowledge. And not only is it based in knowledge, but it is something that is useful not just in one situation. What the dollar's going to do next week, by the time you've edited this piece and got it and released it, who knows what could happen in the 2 or 3 days in the meantime? Some statement could have been made, some plaza call could have been put in place, and it's worthless. But I went in very early in that year of 2018. I went to Switzerland to interview a dear friend and a man who's become just so important to me as a mentor and a sounding board, Tony Deaton. And we sat down for a day, and Tony was just so wonderfully gracious with his time. And we just talked about really just how he sees the world. We talked a little bit about his life and his career, but really we just talked about how he sees it. And it was more a philosophical discussion than anything else. But it was so profound, the things he was saying. And Tony said to at one point in that, he said, it's simple, but it's not easy. When I asked him about what you have to do to kind of navigate this world. And if you could boil all of this down to one thing, to me, it's that. It's simple, but it's not easy, because it is simple, but it sure as hell isn't easy. And that kind of, it sounds kind of trite, but that little sentence, you can take that and you can apply that 1,000 different ways in your life, to areas much broader than finance, to every area of finance. And that's something that you can live by. That's words you can live by. I could have spent those 5 minutes talking about what Tony thought gold was going to do, and it would have been interesting, and it would have been a coin toss, and maybe better than a coin toss because Tony knows what he's talking about. But still, that his guess about the gold price a year hence I wouldn't remember what that is now, unless he'd said $1 million, in which case I'd remember it, but for the wrong reasons. So I went down that road, and at the time, Real Vision had kind of reached this point where Raoul was trying to scale the business, and Raoul and I had come to an agreement that he would run the business, because I don't want to manage a business, nor do I have any aptitude for managing it. I'd much rather be out talking to people and doing the interviews and engaging with the guests. So Raoul was the CEO, and Raoul was running the business, and we've reached the point where he was desperately trying to scale the business. And to scale the business, to bring in a bigger audience, there's a reason why most of these outlets talk about trade ideas and talk about what you should buy and what you should sell, because that's how you build a big audience, because people want to be told that stuff. And so I understood why they wanted to go that way. But for me, I just wasn't interested in that. I didn't want to sit down with someone and ask them where they thought the S&P was going to be at the end of the year. It just had no interest for me. So it just kind of came to its natural end. The Raoul and the business wanted to go in this direction. I just wrapped up that series of interviews, which were in a completely different direction. They didn't want to go down that road anymore, which I totally respected. And so it just kind of felt like the perfect place for me to say, you know what, that's great. I'm still a shareholder. At that point, I remained on the board. But I just said, look, I'm going to let you guys carry on, and I'm just going back to writing things that make you go home. So that was my plan. I had no plans to do a podcast. I had no plans to do anything, but go back to my writing and kind of figure out what I was going to do next. But that, there was nothing sinister to it. Everyone would love to hear some great story of a huge bust up. It just wasn't like that. It just, we reached this point in the road where the business wanted to go a certain way, and it just didn't fit with what I wanted to do. And so, we all shook hands and went our separate ways. And I say I'm still a shareholder. I wish them all the success in the world with the business. So that's it. I mean, I wish I could give you a really juicy story, like, Real Housewives of Cayman Islands, but I got nothing for you.
Well, what did it feel like?
But Danielle, I'll say this. The four of us, Raoul, me, Remy, and Damien, together the four of us built something that we couldn't have even dreamed that we'd be able to build. And in terms of the building of the business, Raoul takes all the credit for that. I mean, he did a fantastic job running that and being the CEO and doing all that stuff. Freeing Damien up to do his thing, freeing Remy up to do his thing. And freeing me up to go and do my thing. I didn't know what my thing was going to be, but I kind of found it through that. So, each one of us played a part in the business, and I think, we'll be bonded through it forever. I don't think you go through something like that and not be kind of joined at the hip forever. And it was everything you'd expect building a business to be. It was exhilarating and frustrating and infuriating and tiring and wonderful, everything. It was everything, and I wouldn't have it any other way. I've enjoyed it from beginning to end.
So what did it feel like to go back to the keyboard, to writing?
Well, I never really stopped. I never stopped writing things that make you go home through my years at Real Vision. I kept that up. It was a great way for me to kind of stay with my head in the markets and stay focused on what was going on. And so I never stopped that. And also, I wasn't taking a salary from Real Vision, so I need something to pay my rent. So we're going back to it again with the space and time to do it without other commitments was definitely freeing. It wasn't as hard because I was writing it in airport lounges and in hotel rooms and, trains and all kinds of things, because I had deadlines to keep and I was traveling all the time. So it was going back. And then, soon after that was when COVID hit. And so the podcast grew out of me being locked down in the Cayman Islands, and we were locked down here. So, we weren't allowed out of our homes for probably 2 or 3 months, really, apart from an hour's exercise a day. And then, halfway through that, they then banned us from going on the beach. It was pretty hardcore here. And so I was stuck at home, and I was chatting to Pippa Malmgren on the phone, just catching up and talking about the world and COVID and what was happening and what have you. And I said to Pippa, this has been really fun. Why don't we? Should we do this? Have this conversation again, or one similar to it? And I'll record it, and we'll kind of put it out and let other people. And this was in the early days of Zoom, and everyone was doing a Zoom call. So I just said, it would be a bit of fun. And then I thought, well, if I'm going to do this, why don't I try and line a few more up, and I'll do them for a week. So I set up this, I called a few friends and people and just said, look, would you be interested in doing one of these conversations with me? And so I filled up a week or 10 days of one of these conversations live every day, and I called them Hmmm at the time, and just let people, again, same back-to-back real vision I do, just eavesdrop on conversations. And there was so much fun. I really, really enjoyed them, because at that time, obviously, we were all stuck at home. We were all desperately trying to figure out what the hell was going on. Yeah. And so to get the input of Pippa and John Hussman and, Ben Hunt and Diego Pri and all these different people, to get their thoughts on all this, it was a jumble, because none of us really knew what was going on, but it was such useful information to take in and process and try and figure out what was going on. And so I did those for, I think I did 10 days of them, and said, right, that's it. I mean, that was fun. I had no plans to do any more. And I had so many emails from people saying, are you going to do any more of those? So like a month later, I lined up another week of them, I think. And again, the response was great. And so I enjoyed the conversation. So it kind of turned into a podcast, really just by pure accident. It wasn't, I'd love to pretend I had this great scheme lined up and, this plan for world domination. And I didn't. I just was bored sitting at home and not talking to anybody. And I'm fortunate enough to have a lot of really smart friends who still, after all these years, will talk to me. So I figured, well, why the hell not, Well,
I mean, I probably shouldn't say this out loud, but the one that I did with you recently was my favorite, post-COVID interview, period. I mean, it's.
Well, yeah, that's because you were fantastic on it. I'm not surprised you're favorite. You were wonderful.
Well, but still, it kind of feels like shooting the breeze. It's just, it's fun, and it's just a conversation. I mean, the only thing that's missing is we're not sitting in a pub. Other than that,
exactly right. Which is why I thought what you did with art was just beautiful. To do that at Bobby Van's with the two of you sitting there and the noise of the diners in the background, I absolutely loved that. I thought that was just such a wonderful, wonderful thing for us to be able to sit and listen in on. It was just a delight. It really was.
Well, normally we're in studio, but I have to say I'm not tooting my horn at all, but I'll say that after sitting down with Art at his bar stool with his plaque on his name on his plaque in front of it in New York, it was funny. The crew got there and they were like, "Oh no, we can't film her," and I'm like, he doesn't move from this spot. This is his spot. Look, it has his name on it. This is his bar stool. This is where he sits. This is where we're going to do this interview, no matter how loud it gets. But I did get to interview Tobias Lefkovich in his first long-form interview.
Fantastic.
So Citigroup had finally given him clearance, because it's so hard for these sell-side guys to get clearance. I asked Michael Hartnett recently, because I love the Flow Show. And he's like, nope. So, I mean, it takes a long time to make your bones on the sell side and actually be able to do something like that. So I guess the greatest honor of my Down the Middle series is that his grandkids will always have that episode, that long form episode, instead of little CNBC snippets.
That's it. I think that's a big part of it, to be honest, Danielle. I mean, for me, that was what I wanted to do, was create a time capsule of someone's career that they would be proud to show their kids. And if their grandkids wanted to know who grandpa or grandma was, well, watch this. This will tell you everything you need to know about them. And at a time when they're still, engaged and focused on a daily basis in what made them who they are. And look, that being able to take that knowledge and transfer it to the next generation is just so important, and people don't want to take the time to do that. I've started a new video series recently. I've just put the third one up, I think, with Pippa. And look, I've spoken to Pippa. She's become such a dear friend over the last decade or so. And I have so many conversations with Pip, and she's just a remarkable woman. And we happened to be in the States at the same time, and she came to my house and we spent the day talking. And, we ended up with a 3-hour interview. And people go, a 3-hour interview? Wow, that's a commitment. But hey, watch it. You don't have to watch it in one go. But when you dig into that and you take the time to have these conversations, it's amazing what you get out when you're not in a hurry and you don't just want a quick answer. And there's so much valuable information locked away inside experienced people's brains. But we live in a world that embraces the short, and the kinetic, and everybody wants snappy stuff, and they want it to be bite-sized and snackable, and all these buzzwords about content, which, look, might be absolutely fine when it comes to entertainment, but I think to try and shove finance into that bracket is a big mistake. I think the networks that are trying to do that and pandering to the audience that wants short form content, ultimately, I think that's going to prove to be a very, very big mistake.
So the last time we were on a podcast together, I'm going to shift gears here a little bit because what you said about growing up in a time of unrest and in England, and obviously what we're going through here in the United States, but we both kind of came to the same conclusion. This is months ago. This is before things became kind of even more divided than they are today. You basically said politics is economics right now, and we would prefer that not be the case. But walk me through your thinking on that, because it's impossible to sit down in front of Bubble Vision and look through the silo of the financial markets and not incorporate the broader narrative right now.
No, it's so true. And, if you think about why this is, what tends to happen is when you reach the end of big cycles, big economic cycles, you find that politics becomes more important because it's the politicians who desperately try to keep the system together. And every financial system, every reserve currency, all of these things, they all ultimately reach the end of their useful life. It's just the way of the world. We everything about us is cyclical. And so when you reach these points in time, it's politics that allows the show to go on longer than it should. If we left everything to purely economic forces, you and I know full well we'd have had a major crash by now. And hey, it would have been brutal, but we'd be through it. We'd have found clearing prices for assets at much more affordable levels. And we'd be building again at the bottom of the business cycle, which is always a great place to be and a great place for a lot of people to make good money. But you tend to see at that point, nobody wants the crash. Nobody embraces the crash. So it comes down to politics more and more to try and extend the cycle. And unfortunately, and nobody knows this better than you, that politics has infected the Mariner Eccles building now. The Fed has become politicized. It's just a reality. They can say all they want about independence, scream till they're blue in the face. We all know that's not the case. It is now a captured political institution. And so, initially the politicians kind of abdicated the political responsibility to the Fed. This is the Greenspan Fed. Greenspan embraced that and loved being the guy, right, who everybody looked to whenever things got tough. Old Al, he'll ride in and save us and everything will be fine. People, I think the most important part of my book, and I'm not touting my book, but I think the most important takeaway is that in the weeks and months that followed October 19th, 1987, a man who was obsessed with the stock market was leaking information to bond trading desks before the Fed injected liquidity in the system through the open markets desk. I mean, this is something that he directed. Yeah, it's funny enough, the examples are everywhere. I remember doing a presentation back in, I want to say 2012 maybe, but I did a presentation and I had a list of names that appeared from the bottom of the screen. And I said, right, I want everyone in the audience, I want you to put your hand up when you know what this is a list of names of. And there were maybe a dozen names that went up there. And it wasn't until the penultimate name that half the hands in the room went up, and then the rest of the hands in the room went up. And they were the last 10 or 12 governors of the Swiss National Bank. And it got to Simon Jordan. I forget the guy's name now. Yeah, great. And suddenly everyone's hand went up. And I said, look, you weren't supposed to know these names. The fact that you now know the name of the head of the Swiss National Bank is what's important here, because you shouldn't. There is no way that you should be sitting here and know the name of the head of the Swiss National Bank. It's just not supposed to be that way. And so, it was the same with the Federal Reserve. Till Greenspan, fine, we all kind of knew of Volcker because what he'd done, but try and get people to put in order William McChesney Martin and Arthur Burns, those guys, no one can do it because they weren't that important. And now we've had Greenspan and Bernanke and Yellen and Powell, and whether Powell comes back, they've become household names because they're the ones to whom the power has been abdicated, the political power to keep the cycle going. So I think as we've reached that point, these cycles tend to end in inflations. because the nature of keeping them going is inflationary. It is essentially money printing, right? That's how you keep the game going. You try to default on all the debt that's built up through inflation, and guess what? You screw it up, and you either get hyperinflation or you get a deflationary depression. But you screw it up one way or the other. There isn't a soft landing out of this, unfortunately. So I think that politics is economics is important for people to understand, because the decisions that get made now will continue to be political in nature. So we're trying to figure out what's going to happen. The decisions will be political in nature until, and Pippa made this point in the conversation that she and I had recently, until people start writing to their congressman and complaining about higher prices. Because that's the Achilles heel. It's the Achilles heel in China on a much lower level. It's the Achilles heel over here. And this is exactly what happened with Volcker. People were writing to local congressmen, and Volcker had to go to Jimmy Carter and say, look, I'm getting pressure from everybody here. I need you to go on TV and give me the cover to raise interest rates. And it's going to be painful, but it's the only way this can be done. And Carter did that, and then Carter's out and Reagan's in, and Volcker, as Pippa said, had to go to Reagan and get him to make the exact same speech. And so interest rates had to go up to almost 20%. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of where we are. Again, we're at that point. The system is at its limits. The debt level is way more now than it was back then. And the natural force of the cost of money is higher from here. But we may have to have a clearing event that's much, much lower in order to get to that. And I don't know which way it'll go. They're both equally painful. The Feds and the government would prefer inflation rather than deflation, because it's the sneakiest tax of all. But they're not going to get 2% inflation, which they've promised us forever, and a nice quiet glide path. They're going to get 6%. They're going to get 16% in Europe on the PPI indices, and it's just going to get out of hand, and that's going to require some medicine. So, I think everyone has to, unfortunately, pay close attention to politics now, and it's a messy, messy world.
Well, I mean, monetary policy every time around didn't quite do the trick. We kind of slipped back down into this disinflationary environment, but then we throw $5 trillion, you direct deposit it into the accounts of Americans, and all of a sudden, when
guess what happens?
And the Fed's monetizing every dime of it, and boom, here we are. And just to your point, the media, this last FOMC press conference, I found to be fascinating, because they're normally such cordial events. And the reporters were really pressing Powell, saying, but people are hurting. So I feel like we're at this point, and now you're seeing certain moderates come out and say, Fed needs to tighten policy. I mean, when was the last time you heard a politician say that the central bank needs to tighten policy out loud?
Yeah.
And so you don't know where we're gonna land. I don't either. I'm just curious if you think that there is at least going to be some persistence to the high prices that we're experiencing in the here and now. Because even if they, in the Lacey Hunt school of thought, even if they eventually fade, it sucks right now.
Yeah. I just had a text from a dear friend of mine who was trying to buy an iPhone for one of her kids for Christmas, and she was texting me from the Apple store saying, I'm in the Apple store. The only phone I can buy is the $1,600 13 Pro Max something. Every other phone is sold out, and if I want to order one, it won't be here for Christmas. And that's hashtag first world problems. We're not talking about strained food lines here, but it's amazing how insidious this is. And I think that the big problem here is the recent memory that people have of COVID and being unable to buy what they wanted, to having shelves that were empty, to not being able to buy bread and not being able to buy toilet paper famously, or cleaning products, or any of these things. And when you have that memory in your mind, you'll pay 10% more for toilet roll. If you have practical experience of not being able to buy it, you'll pay 10% more for it if you can. And you might complain, but you're not going to complain like you would if we hadn't had what went on in March of 2020, you go, this is absolutely ridiculous. I'm not paying for this. So COVID has actually jump-started this inflationary expectation in people's minds by giving them a frame of reference of how it could be. And, that's problematic because, what did my friend do? She bought the $1,600 phone because it was a Christmas present for her son, right? So that trickles down on all sorts of levels. People will buy the $25 steak because they promised their kid coming home that he was going to have steak. But I'm going to have to cut back on someone else now. I promised the kid steak. The price has doubled. So these prices going up create problems. And, we saw this morning the announcement that this John Deere Labour dispute had ended. And guess what? Labour won. Labour stuck it to capital for the first time in a meaningful way in a long, long time. And I think Labour is now understanding just how much capital has gotten away with over these last 20, 30 years. And the buybacks and the options and the fact that the CEOs have been making hay, no matter how tough the business has been, and the fact that the working man on the assembly line hasn't been getting pay rises, certainly not real pay increases. And yet we've got more multi-millionaire CEOs now than any time in history. So that John Deere thing, I think, is a big deal. And Julian Brigden spoke about it in a recent podcast I did with him, and he's absolutely right. It's a big deal. It hadn't been resolved then because the union had basically turned down 3 actually pretty good offers from the company as to what they would give them, and when they turned them down, it was basically, look, the management have been getting rich every year no matter what. Now we want ours. And so there's 2 mindsets there. One is on a personal level, that willingness to pay higher prices because you don't want to not be able to have that item. And 2 is, someone's going to have to pay for this. And you guys are getting rich off us and have been for years, we'll know more. Those 2 mindsets are very, very dangerous for central bankers as inflation expectations get entrenched, because the pressure doesn't go away for companies to increase or expand their margins. Mm-hmm. So if you've got a double-digit PPI, and there may be a quarter or 2 where these companies can swallow that difference between that and inflation, but if they've got a public that's willing to pay higher prices, believe me, if they can push those price increases through to the consumer, they absolutely will, because, hey, capitalism, right? That's what we're doing. We're trying to maximize our returns for our shareholders. So prices are going up 16% and we can push a 17% price hike through. We are going to do it. We're not going to say, you know what, we've had 10 good years here, guys. How about we eat some of this for the greater good? No, not going to happen. Nope. So we're on the very, very edge here. We are on the very pointy end of potentially something really problematic, because every single part of the world around us, every single part, is now predicated upon free money. And if the cost of money goes up, which everything we just spoke about dictates it has to, then there's a lot of things that you and I are immersed in on a daily basis that just don't work anymore. Certainly not at the price they're at, and that's a potentially serious problem for central bankers first, politicians second, and us third.
Well, especially because we've got this glaring. The elephant in the room is that we're the first we're practically on top of the first primary for the midterm elections. Yeah. So, I mean, a lot of nothing is going to happen between now and whatever, January 2023. I mean, it's a long span of time for markets when it's obvious now the Fed can't go at it alone. They have to have the fiscal authorities with them in order to move the needle on consumption. And the United States is a consumption-led economy. Somebody said a few days ago, we're up to 71% of U.S. GDP being consumption. I mean, it's just a gigantic number. So first of all, what are your ties to Singapore? And on a broader level, is the world economy going in that direction? Is is the rise of Asia an inevitability? And I'm not just talking about China at all.
Well, I think it's difficult to. I struggle to think of it in terms of Asia as an umbrella. I mean, when you look at that part of the world, I spent 10 years in Singapore, and I still work with my great friend Steve Diggle at Vulpes, and Steve is just one of the smartest people you're ever going to spend any time with. It's quite intimidating actually sitting and talking to Steve. But so I have strong connections with Singapore, and Singapore has always been a fascinating test case for me for an awful lot of things. It's trite, but it really is a country run like a business, and they've been able to do that because of the politics of the place. And while Singapore has its drawbacks, and a lot of ink has been spilled on the things you can't do in Singapore, I'll say this, that most of the things you can't do, I don't want to do anyway. So there's a great bargain made in Singapore. So here's the rules, and you can't do this, 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 and this. And a lot of you might want to do these things, but you can't. And if you don't do those things, you're not going to see us. The government are not going to be in your face. The police aren't going to be in your face. We're all going to get on just great. But if you do them, we're going to cane you, or we're going to put you in prison, or we're going to execute you. So there's the deal. And I think it works pretty well. But because of the grip on power that Lee Kuan Yew's PAP have had for the entire length of Singapore's existence as an independent country, they've been able to make decisions that are best for Singapore, not necessarily to win votes, because they had all the votes. And it's interesting, in recent years, you again, these inflationary pressures are starting to happen. There's starting to be the odd decision made that is clearly designed to keep certain parts of the inhabitants of Singapore happy, or assuage concerns they have. So they're starting to reach that point where, yeah, we know what's best for Singapore, but what's best for us and what's best for Singapore may not actually be the same. And COVID's been interesting. They had a 3-week quarantine in position in Singapore, and no home quarantine. You go to Singapore, you spend 3 weeks in a government institution. You can't open the window. I mean, it was as draconian as it comes. And they then put a quarantine at home program in place for residents. And I know all this because Steve Diggle was in Italy waiting to try and get back to Singapore. And he said, I'm not going to go until I can quarantine at home. I'll do 3 weeks, but it has to be at home. I'm not doing it in a small room in a Holiday Inn. And so they announced that they would put this quarantine at home thing in place. And so Steve booked his flight. And then out of nowhere, the Prime Minister basically stood down his 2 chief medical advisors, and at the stroke of a pen said, right, screw this. We are putting in vaccine travel lanes. If you're double jabbed and you come from certain countries, there's no quarantine. So they went from 3 weeks to nothing like that. No discussion, no debates in Parliament, nothing. We are going to have to learn to live with this disease. So let's get on with it. Let's be pragmatic and let's do this. So that's the kind of ability that you have, and abilities that a lot of these Asian countries have. But I think when you talk about, is the world going to, you said go that way, talking about Asia. Yeah. To me, it's really a question of, has capitalism reached its kind of apogee? I don't know the answer to that. I mean, I do know that capitalism, as we understand it from the earliest explanations of it, this is not Adam Smith's capitalism, right? No. It just isn't anymore.
No, the hand is very visible.
The argument, the hand, exactly right. The hand is very visible, and it's slapping you around the face on a daily basis. But what we're seeing is not that, and so again, that suggests that we've reached the end of a major cycle, because they're having to bastardize the entire system to make it continue to function. So it may well be that we just see capitalism, we see it overthrown, and we're seeing things in the US now on a political basis that I never thought I'd see in my lifetime. The rise of the progressive left, the embrace by many people of socialism in America shocks me. I never thought this would be something that would happen in America, but it's not happened, but it's much further down that track than I ever thought it would be. And it's got more traction than I ever thought it would get. So we're starting to see that people are turning away from capitalism because there is an inequity to it at the moment, which is hurting a lot of people. Mm-hmm. And of course, capitalism doesn't allow for that. If we had capitalism, we'd have bankrupt companies littering the streets over the last 10 years. Mm-hmm. And all that dead wood would have been cleaned out, and people would be able to earn income on their savings, and all the things that capitalism does, it would do. But we don't have it anymore. So I don't think it's a question of people moving towards an Asian model. I think it's Western democratic capitalism reaching a fork in the road where you either have to return it to what it was designed to be and what has worked so well for centuries, which requires an awful lot of pain, or you have to postpone the pain, keep it on the road it's going. And I think at that point, you risk veering off in a nasty leftly direction, if that's such a word. I don't know, probably not.
Well, it is. There's a certain irony in Chinese policymakers talking about left-leaning policies in the United States. I mean, it twists.
Yeah, ain't that the truth?
It twists your head into a real pretzel. I do have one specific.
Well, 10 years ago, the phrase "capitalism with Chinese characteristics" meant one thing, and today that same phrase means something completely different. Mm-hmm. And that's the change, I think, over that 10 years. That we still use that phrase, but there's still people are still going to jail in China, and people are getting executed in China, and companies are being taken down in China. That's capitalism. It used to be.
So I have a question that's very specific, and you won't have the answer. I don't have the answer. But if push comes to shove, which country do you think Germany would likely side with, China or the United States?
It's a great question. It's a really, really good question, and I think it's an important question. But I'm going to throw another country in the mix for you, and that's Russia. I'm in the middle of writing something about Russia, and I think Russia is something that needs to be taken seriously, mainly because of the guy who's running the place. Putin is look. You don't rise to be a lieutenant colonel in the KGB without being ruthless, right? We know that. You get stationed in East Germany as a spy without being cunning. We know that. You don't retire as a lieutenant colonel of the KGB and be president of your country within a decade without either knowing where the bodies are or being offered. We know all this stuff, right? But what we have now in Russia is arguably the only strong leader anywhere in the world. And I use that term very deliberately, right? With the best will in the world, Joe Biden is not a leader, right? Donald Trump was not a leader. He was a leader for some, but he's not a leader and a shrewd political operator. Boris Johnson is not a leader. Scott Morrison down in Australia, or that fella down under, as Joe Biden referred to him, is not a leader. Angela Merkel was a leader. She's gone, right? Emmanuel Macron is not a leader. Before him, Francois Hollande, not a leader. He was a Homer Simpson stunt double, but he wasn't a leader. So Xi Jinping, like it or not, is a leader, right? Now, he's a leader in a very different sense, and it's a cult of personality. It's a personal autocracy that he's got there, and that's fine. But the leaders are not in Western democracies anymore, because to lead in the West now has become a popularity contest. That's all it is. It's what do I have to give to who to get enough votes to get me in power? That's it. End of. So I think that Russia, which is A, by far the biggest country on earth in terms of landmass, B, has the biggest natural resources on earth by a country mile, yep. C, has a strong leader, and D, has a phenomenal position physically in the world, and is now got its finger on the choke point of energy to Europe. Russia has to be in this conversation. And you can't have this conversation about what happens next without Russia. And if you look at what's happened in the West, again, I'm writing a long piece about this at the moment, which is why all this stuff's in my head. Every year, Putin sits down at something called the Vulpes Discussion Club, and he gives his own kind of State of the Union address. And he sits there and he talks, he gives a statement, and he takes questions from the public. And he does this for 3 hours. 3 hours he sits there. Now, we don't get this. We don't get to see this in the West. You might read a story about it. You might read the nasty things Putin said. But if you take the time to go and look, ideally watch him speak, if not listen to him speak, you will hear a very switched on, savvy politician who is the leader of his country and leads him far with an eye. Now, we know all the things that have been said about what he's done. And I am telling you, I don't know, but I know that he is no angel. Right? This is a ruthless, nasty piece of work. But he's also the leader of the largest country on the face of the earth. And we've talked for decades about wealth. What's the wealthiest country? What's wealth? What's become wealth over the last 40 years? It's civilization, it's asset prices, it's paper money. Russia isn't wealthy, it's rich. They've got more oil, more natural gas, more coal, more gold. Russia is a rich country. So I think Russia needs to have a place in this. I'm not saying give them a seat at the very top table, although on a bunch of metrics they deserve it. But ruling them out and buying into the narrative that we get bombarded with in the West, that it's all about Putin and what an evil person he is and how he's responsible for Trump getting elected and this and that, and every death is all down to Putin. A lot of that stuff maybe. But if you think we're not interfering in other people's elections, I mean, surely all the Snowden stuff dropped those scales from everybody's eyes about what statecraft is all about and the fact that it's the same with every country in the world. So I don't think this is just about that. And you asked me a question, which side is Germany going to side on? So I've got off track there, apologies, but this stuff's wrapping around my head.
Well,
but
you are talking
Russia
about Germany and China and contiguous borders. I mean, you're talking about borders here.
Look, Germany with an angry Russia is in trouble. Putin came out today and said that we need to stop the West hijacking the climate agenda. And he's kind of right. Russia deserves a seat at that table, and India deserves a seat at that table. And they're at different points in their economic development. Is it fair for countries who've come so much further to say to them, you're not allowed to do what we did to become rich and successful? You have to do it a different way. I don't know. But Putin is a leader in the true and old-fashioned sense of the word, for good or bad. He's a leader, and I don't see too many of those around. So I think we have to take him and Russia very, very seriously.
We're kind of winding down here. This is something I've been wanting to ask you for a long time. Why Kiowa?
Well, you've been. You know why Kiowa. You've been there. It's
special.
It is. I went there in 1996, and I just fell in love with the place. There was something about it that truly speaks to me. I've gone back. I've been going there for 25 years, and it's the one place in the world where I drive onto that island. I go past a sign that says Kiowa Island, and I'm just peaceful. I'm calm. I'm peaceful. My stress levels drop, and there's something about the combination of the nature and the golf and the ocean and the tennis and the cycling and it's the place in the world where I feel the most comfortable, the most relaxed. The people are lovely. The place is lovely. Hopefully not too many people show up because it's still amazingly pretty unspoiled considering how much it's grown. They've done a fantastic job in not overbuilding and not kind of commercializing it beyond its needs, but it's just a very, very special place. And I would, all joking aside, I would encourage everybody to go and check it out because Kiowa is beautiful. Charleston is just a sublime city, and it's just a very special part of the world to me.
Amazing dining too, by the way. You can really get some good food in Charleston.
No kidding.
Finally, I was like on the floor. I was so surprised. I have to ask, I don't think most people would be able to say Grant Williams is a grandfather times 2. So,
yes.
I'm
well, that's true.
Tell us about them.
I have 2 beautiful granddaughters. Ava, who's 2 and is just an absolute joy. She's just fantastic. And Sienna, whose christening I shall be attending on the 18th of December back in the UK. So I'm going to be back in the UK for the christening on the 18th, and then Christmas with my daughter and my grandkids and my dad, which, after 2 years of COVID is just, I just can't wait to see them all. But yes, I am a grandfather. I was trying to come up with the name that I wanted to be called by my grandkids, and I decided that I would go with Grumpy. I figured, you know what? Grumpy's good because that gives me a runway, right? In years to come, when I'm sitting in the corner of a chair wanting everybody to piss off, it's old Grumpy. I thought, this is great. I can become that guy when I'm good and ready, and I'll be Grumpy. But of course, the best laid plans of mice and men and all that. So Ava, she can't say Grumpy, so I'm now Bunky, unfortunately. It backfired horribly, and I have become Bunky, which I kind of love a little bit more than Grumpy. But yeah, it wasn't my choice, but I love it anyway.
Well, have you met her?
Yes, I have. I got over to the UK last year, so I've been over a couple of times. I mean, the last time I saw Sienna, my youngest, she was in the blob phase. Just stay there and you kind of rock her a bit. But now she's crawling and sitting up and gurgling. So it's going to be great to get back and see her when I can actually interact with her, not just kind of just do this with her.
Oh, fun. Well, Grant, I wanted to end on a super happy note. And that is I'm so excited that you get to go and spend Christmas in the UK. Actually, this episode will probably air sometime around Christmas, believe it or not. We're
perfect.
We stay in the can for a while, so this will be an absolute delight. And I so appreciate you taking a little bit of time today and being on the other side, being on the other side, being the interviewee. And I hope we can do this again in a year, and you can tell me more about those 2 gorgeous granddaughters of yours, but I doubt, I'll be surprised, but I doubt you'll ever be grumpy. I'm just saying, you're just too happy.
Well, I hope not. But listen, Daniel, thanks for having me on it. And look, in all honesty, this is not a comfortable position for me. I'm not really comfortable talking about myself, but you've managed to get me doing that, which is more than most people can. So my thanks to you for making it easy to talk about me for a change, which, as I said, I'm not a huge fan of, to be honest with you.
Well, we're huge fans of yours, and I'm not trying to blow smoke up your ass, and that's all I know. So happy Christmas. I think that's how I'm supposed to say it.
Absolutely right. That's right. I'm English. You can say it to me all day long. And the same to you, and hopefully we'll get to see each other in person before too long.
Yay. I'll come to Kiowa. So yes, absolutely. Take good care. Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Daniel. Bye.
Bye. Well, if you're in my world, your career has grown up watching Grant Williams interview everybody who we know. And that's because he's such an amazing interviewer. So I hope that like I enjoyed it, I hope you enjoyed getting to see who the interviewer is as a person. And what a joy and what a happy person and what a happy grandfather. So if you enjoyed it and you want to see another kind of personal prism into somebody, he really enjoyed that interview with Arthur Cassian. If you missed it for some reason, at Bobby Van's downtown in New York live, it was the most extraordinary experience. So if you didn't see the Art Cassian interview, then go back and do it. And this is Danielle DiMartino Booth. Thank you once again, and I will see you next time for the next Down the Middle. Take care.